All right. So yesterday we talked about chemical digestion and right, the parts of the alimentary canal where carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids are digested, where the enzymes come from, how they're broken down. And right, today we're going to talk about absorption and assimilation. So absorption, as the name suggests, is the body taking up these digested nutrients, right? The carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids that have been broken down into smaller molecules. So the cells absorbing them and then putting them to use. And well, assimilation. So assimilation is the putting to use part. So absorption is taking up, and assimilation is putting to use or utilizing them. So keep in mind that for absorption of these nutrients, the three processes of transport of molecules, diffusion, osmosis, and active transport, all three of these are involved, right? So absorption of nutrients involves diffusion, which is something you would expect to happen because you've eaten food, and so in your small, and absorption happens in the small intestine, right? uh, for these nutrients. So all that digested matters in the small intestine, and so it is very much in higher concentration as compared to what you would expect in the blood and in the body. So uh, right, diffusion is obviously playing a part. Then you got osmosis, which is for water. Now water is part of it is absorbed through the small intestine, but the majority of water is absorbed from the large intestine, from the colon, right? So for water, it's large intestine or colon. Keep that in mind. And then you got active transport. So, right, evidence from research and from studies suggest that the nutrients, when they're absorbed, there a lot of them, even water, in fact, even water is absorbed against the concentration gradient. So, right, what you would expect to happen is, right, this is the ileum or the colon, right, and these are the body cells. And so what you would expect is there's a higher concentration, whether that's of water. So in case of water, we'd say there's a higher water potential, and obviously there's a lower concentration over here. And so what you would, or lower water potential, and what you would expect to happen is the movement of the molecules of water or nutrients up until the point where they become balanced, right? So the concentration gradients or the water potential becomes balanced, and then uh, the diffusion or osmosis would stop. But that's not what happens. So for the nutrients, right? So for the glucose, for example, the amino acids and the fatty acid and glycerol, it is still taken up, right? It is taken up even when the concentration becomes low. So you got, right, a few molecules over here in the ileum, and this is the body, and they're still taken up against the concentration gradient, or in case of water, even against the water potential gradient, uh, and absorbed to the maximum possible extent. So active transport is very much utilized to in the process absorption. So right, keep that in mind. Now, what else can we say? Uh, about absorption, well, as I mentioned, the majority of absorption takes place in the ileum, which is the later part of the second part of the small intestine. And right, the ileum has certain features which make it specialized in for that purpose. Now, some of it I mentioned yesterday, the foldings of the walls and the villi and the microvilli, but let's just quickly talk about them. So the ileum, right, its features that make it suitable for absorption. And so the first is large surface area. Why? Because the small intestine is a very long organ, right? Then it is folded. So there are circular folds in the walls, or the walls of the internal surface is folded. So folding of internal surface. Then you have villi on those folds, right? So plus villi, and these villi are like 0.5 millimeters long. Then the epithelium of the ileum is very thin. So
What is epithelium?
the epithelial cells, the layer of epithelial cells, the internal layer, right? So if you look at it as a transverse, like you cut across the ileum, right? So this is the inside of the ileum over here, inside the circle, and so this blue line represents the cell layer, right? And so this is the epithelial. This is the lining epithelial cells, which, right, the surface is called the epithelium. Now there might be other, right, intestinal cells, and then you would have a network of capillaries outside of it, right? So you would have all of that. And so the epithelium is very thin. And what this does is it decreases the distance for diffusion. And we know that to have maximum diffusion, you need maximum surface area, you need minimum distance, and you need a concentration gradient. So having very thin epithelium decreases the diffusion distance, and so that helps in absorption. And then along with that, they've got microvilli. So not just villi, but microvilli. Remember, villi is plural. The singular of this is villus. So singular. And then we just talked about maintaining a diffusion gradient. So there is a dense network of capillaries, right? And so what that does is it keeps absorbing and removing absorbed nutrients. So the absorbed nutrients don't stay in the epithelium or the epithelial cells of the intestine. From the epithelial cells, they move into the blood capillaries, right, surrounding, and that blood carries the nutrients away, right? And so the blood coming in after that, it doesn't have the nutrients, so diffusion then carries it away. The blood coming in after that doesn't have nutrients, diffusion, and so the diffusion gradient is maintained. Okay. Now the glucose and amino acids, right, when they enter the bloodstream, they enter the capillaries uh, in the small intestine. So the capillaries, this dense network of capillaries is found within the villi, right? To say within is like that, that's the region where, through the epithelial cells, and I'll show you an illustration in the book which will make it clearer, right? So from there, the capillaries join to form veins, and from there what they do is that they form a vein called the hepatic portal vein, right? And this takes the absorbed glucose plus amino acids, so these two, right, not the fatty acid and glycerol, amino acids from the ileum to the liver. Okay, so this is sort of like a direct connection between the small intestine and the liver. Now what happens in the liver is, right, some of the nutrients, if they are in excess, they might be stored. So the nutrients may be stored, or they might be modified in some way, right? Some processing might take place, and then after that, whatever's left, right, goes back to the blood circulation, right? And from there, the nutrients are supplied to the body cells. Okay.
Yeah.
Now within the villi, there is another network of vessels, which are not the blood vessels, and these are called lacteals. So what happens is the fatty acids and glycerol, when they're absorbed by the villi, they enter the lacteals, not the blood vessels, but the lacteals. And inside the lacteals, they recombine, right, and form lipids. And those lipids are carried in the lacteals, right? And the system of lacteals, just like the system of blood vessels is called the circulatory system, which we'll talk about later. The system of lacteals are carried in the lymphatic system. Now, details of the lymphatic system and what lacteals are and how does this work, nothing. This is the only mention. I mean, in earlier syllabi, I believe way back when, there used to be details of this, right? Lymph nodes and lymphatic system and etc. etc. But now there isn't. They're just mentioning, oh, right, fatty acids and glycerol don't go into the blood directly. They enter lacteals. They go around the lymphatic system in those lacteals, and then they are returned or released into the blood, right? So it's sort of a roundabout route. So as the book says, emptied into blood later, and from there, right, they are supplied to the to the body cells. Okay. Now talking about vitamins, water soluble vitamins, uh, right, may be absorbed directly. Fat soluble vitamins are absorbed along with fat droplets. Right, so that's just a bit of information about those given in the text. Let's show you an illustration of these, which will make it clearer. So let me just share that on screen. Right, so as you can see here, right, this is part of the small intestine, and you can see that the inner surface is very much folded. Those folds zoomed in give you the villi, and you can see the red lines over here. That's the dense capillary network. And also if you zoom in, right, you can see that single layer of cells, the epithelium made up of the epithelial cells, right, the longitudinal and circular muscles for peristalsis, and then the capillary network that's giving you the blood supply. Over here, this is a single villus, and again the epithelium, right, so the single layer of cells. The red network, the meshwork, are the blood capillaries that are carrying away the glucose and the amino acids, and this thick sort of off-white creamish uh, vessel coming in, right, sort of behind or surrounded by the blood capillaries, is the lacteal. Right, now you need to sort of know the position of the lacteal as compared to the blood vessels in such a diagram, because questions, at least in MCQs, perhaps in paper 2 as well, have been asked about this, to label them, to identify them and their function and whatnot. Okay, so right, that's the diagrammatic representations. Now coming back and quickly wrapping up this chapter, we're going to talk about how the digested food is utilized. So, right, and that is the assimilation part. So, let's give a subheading over here: assimilation. And then, first of all, we talk about glucose. So, glucose is primarily utilized for cellular respiration, right? That is, its main purpose. So what cellular respiration does is it utilizes glucose along with oxygen. So glucose plus oxygen, and that releases energy, and that energy is used for the buildup of materials within the cell, such as proteins and muscular contraction, and nerve impulses and other metabolic reactions, obviously, and things like active transport uses energy. Now, amino acids are used to build up proteins, right? And there are so many different kinds of proteins that are present all over the body. The major kind we can talk about are enzymes, right? So building proteins in cells, such as enzymes, which catalyze just about all metabolic reactions that take place in the body. So they're everywhere. And you've got plasma proteins. So those are the proteins in the blood. You've got proteins in the cell membrane. Cell membrane proteins. Right, some of your hormones are proteins. So they're everywhere, right? And in some cases, amino acids are converted to glycogen. And this happens when they are in excess, so more than the body requires. And glycogen is the storage carbohydrate in the human body. And then they are later again utilized for respiration. And finally, you have lipids. Right, so the lipids are used to build up cell membranes and other structures. So the membranes of cells are made up of lipids as well as proteins and carbohydrates, but the main component is lipids. And you've got lipids in other parts of your body. So you've got like a layer of fat under your skin. So that's subcutaneous fat. We'll talk about that a bit later in the chapter. Right, for example, your lips are fat. They're lipid actually, right? So, and there's sort of like thin layers of lipids surrounding some of your organs, and that's for, to protect them. Lipids are also a very important source of energy. We've talked about this earlier. Lipids provide about twice as much as energy, so they can be metabolized for energy in cellular respiration. Right, in that case, they are oxidized, and the products are carbon dioxide and water. So oxidized, and they release carbon dioxide and water. Yeah, and that brings us to the end of this chapter. And so next time we will start off with chapter 9, which is human gas exchange. All right, so I'll see you next class, inshallah.